In 1972, an anthropologist named Marshall Sahlins published a book that made a lot of people uncomfortable. He had studied hunter-gatherer societies all over the world, and he came to a conclusion that went against everything most people believed about prehistoric life. Ancient humans, the ones we picture as constantly starving and struggling to survive, actually worked about 3 to 5 hours a day. That was it. The rest of the time, they had nothing to do. But here's the part nobody expected. That boredom, that stretch of empty hours with no screens and no distractions, might be the single most important thing that ever happened to our species. We tend to imagine prehistoric life as this non-stop grind. Wake up, dodge predators, hunt something, try not to die before sunset. It's one of those ideas that feels true without anyone ever really questioning it. Thomas Hobbes called primitive life nasty, brutish, and short, and that phrase has stuck in our collective imagination for over 300 years. But the actual evidence tells a completely different story. Sahlins first presented his theory at a now famous symposium called Man the Hunter, held in Chicago in 1966. The idea was radical for the time. He argued that affluence is not about having everything you could possibly want. It is about the relationship between what you need and how easily you can get it. Hunter-gatherers needed very little by our standards, and they could meet those needs quickly. By that definition, they were richer than most people alive today. He called them the original affluent society, and the phrase shocked the academic world. He wasn't working from guesses, he was working from data. An anthropologist named Richard Lee had spent years living among the Juhoansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert in Botswana. Lee carefully tracked every hour the Bushmen spent on different activities, building one of the most detailed records of hunter-gatherer daily life ever created. What he found supported exactly what Sahlins was saying. The Bushmen spent around 15 to 20 hours per week on what you would call subsistence work, meaning the actual business of hunting and gathering food. That breaks down to roughly 3 to 5 hours a day. And even when Lee added in food preparation and cooking, the total still came in well below what most modern workers put in at their jobs. Think about that. You are probably working 40 hours a week or more, commuting on top of that, running errands, doing housework, cooking, cleaning, answering emails at 10 at night. Your ancestors spent a fraction of that time securing everything they needed to eat, and the rest of the day was wide open. They napped in the middle of the afternoon. They sat around camp and talked for hours. They played with their children. They watched the sky. They had, by any reasonable measurement, more leisure time than you do right now. The economist John Maynard Keynes predicted in 1930 that by the year 2030, technology would have advanced enough that people would only need to work 15 hours a week. He thought machines would give us the gift of free time. Instead, the only people in human history who actually lived that 15-hour work week were the ones who never had any machines at all. Now, some researchers have pushed back on the numbers over the decades. The estimates shift depending on what you count as work and what you count as leisure. Some studies put the real total closer to 30 to 40 hours a week when you factor in every task. But even the higher estimates still fall below the grind that most industrial and post-industrial workers endure. The argument was never that prehistoric life was easy in every way. It clearly was not. Injuries were deadly. Childbirth was dangerous. A bad drought could end everything. The argument was that on a normal day, in a normal week, ancient humans had a lot of time with nothing urgent to do. And that free time changed the trajectory of our entire species. So what did they actually do with all those hours? This is where it gets interesting. Because the answer is not nothing. The answer is almost everything we consider distinctly human. Art, music, language, games, storytelling, religion. The entire catalogue of things that separate us from every other species on the planet traces back, in one way or another, to ancient people sitting around with time on their hands and minds that would not stay still. It started with sound. In 2008, a team of archaeologists working inside a cave called Hohlefels in the Swabian Jura region of southern Germany pulled 12 fragments of bone out of the sediment and carefully pieced them together. What they assembled was a flute, not a rough whistle, not a hollowed-out stick with a hole punched through it. A real, deliberately crafted musical instrument about 22 centimeters long, carved from the wing bone of a griffon vulture. It had 5 finger holes and a carefully shaped, notched mouthpiece designed to produce clear tones. Nicholas Conard, the archaeologist from the University of Tübingen, who led the excavation, said it was unambiguously the oldest instrument in the world. Carbon dating placed it at roughly 35,000 years old. But that wasn't even the oldest find in the area. Other caves in the same region had already produced bone and ivory flutes, dating back even further, to around 42,000 to 43,000 years ago. Some of these older flutes were carved from mammoth tusks, which is an almost absurd level of craft when you stop and think about it. Mammoth ivory is dense, it's curved, it does not naturally want to become a hollow tube. To shape it into a working flute, you have to split the tusk lengthwise, carve out the interior, rejoin the halves, and drill precise finger holes that produce distinct musical notes. That is not the behavior of people who are barely scraping by. That is the behavior of people with skill, patience, and hours of unoccupied time to fill. When modern researchers created replicas of these ancient flutes and played them, the results were startling. The instruments could produce a range of notes, enough to play actual melodies. Archaeologist Wolf Hein demonstrated one of the replicas for a crowd, and the sound that came out of a 40,000-year-old design was recognizably musical. Clear, bright tones, not random noise. Not accident, it was shaped sound, organized by a mind that understood pitch and rhythm long before anyone had a word for either. NPR described the discovery as evidence that music is so basic to human nature, it goes back to our earliest days as a species. And these were not isolated experiments. The Swabian Jura caves have produced multiple flutes across different sites, meaning this wasn't one bored genius who invented the flute and never told anyone. It was a musical tradition, a culture of instrument making and playing that was sustained across generations. And the caves themselves weren't chosen at random. A researcher named Igor Reznikov, a specialist in ancient music at the University of Paris, spent years studying the acoustic properties of painted caves across France. What he found was that cave paintings were concentrated in the areas where sound behaved most dramatically. Hum into certain bends in the walls, and the sound bounces back, amplified, distorted, alive in ways that feel almost supernatural in complete darkness. Some formations even produce sounds that mimicked the animals painted on the walls nearby. Reznikov argued that ancient humans selected these spaces deliberately. They found the spots where sound resonated, and those are exactly where they gathered, painted, and almost certainly played music. Tens of thousands of years before the first concert hall, prehistoric humans were already performing inside natural amphitheaters deep underground. Imagine it. A chamber lit by the flicker of animal fat lamps, painted bison and horses seeming to move on the walls as the firelight shifts. The sound of a bone flute echoing off limestone formations. That's not a starving person trying to survive another night. That is a person with enough time and security to create something for no reason other than the experience of it. But the music was only part of what happened in those caves. The paintings themselves tell a story that goes even deeper. On a cold December afternoon in 1994, 3 French cave explorers named Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire were following an air current through a narrow opening in the cliffs above the Ardèche River in southern France. They squeezed through a gap, dropped down into a chamber, and found themselves standing in front of something that had not been seen by human eyes in over 30,000 years. Hundreds of paintings covered the walls. Lions in mid-hunt, mammoths walking in groups, rhinoceroses charging, bison, horses, bears, all rendered with an artistic confidence and attention to detail that stunned every expert who saw them. The paintings in what became known as Chauvet Cave were roughly 36,000 years old, and they looked like they could have been painted by someone who studied anatomy. Chauvet was not alone. Across southern France, A sprawling cave system near the village of Montignac contains the famous Lascaux paintings, estimated to be around 17,000 to 20,000 years old. The complex holds around 600 wall paintings and roughly 1,500 engravings spread across multiple chambers. Horses appear most often, followed by stags, wild cattle, and ibex. The artists who created them understood something about visual perception that most art students do not learn until their second year of study. They used the natural contours of the rock to give their animals a three-dimensional quality. Placing a painted shoulder exactly where a bulge in the stone created the right shadow. They worked by lamplight, and they knew how to use the flickering glow to create the illusion of movement. One bison at Chauvet was painted with 8 legs, not because the artist couldn't count, but because those extra limbs showed the animal in motion. Hold a lamp just right, and the figure appears to gallop across the stone. Researchers have described it as prehistoric cinema, and the comparison is more than a metaphor. Some of the artists even used stencil techniques and a style of painting that would later be called pointillism, applying small dots of pigment to build an image. These weren't primitive scrawlings. These were produced by skilled individuals who had clearly practiced, refined, and passed on their techniques across generations. And every time scientists think they have found the oldest example, the timeline gets pushed back. In 2024, a team from Griffith University in Australia published findings in the journal Nature about a painting inside a limestone cave called Liang Karampuang on the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia. The scene shows 3 human-like figures interacting with a wild pig. Using a new dating method that measures uranium decay in the mineral deposits that form over cave art, the researchers determined it was at least 51,200 years old. That makes it the oldest known narrative artwork on Earth. Not just a handprint, not just a geometric pattern, a scene with characters and an action. A story. Maxime Aubert, the lead archaeologist on the study, said something that is worth hearing carefully. "We define ourselves as a species that tells stories," he said, "and these are the oldest evidence of us doing that." Over 50,000 years ago, someone stood in a cave in Indonesia, picked up red pigment, and painted a story on a wall. They weren't doing it to eat. They weren't doing it to stay warm. They were doing it because they had time and something inside their mind needed to create. That impulse didn't stay on the walls. It moved to the campfire. In 2014, an anthropologist at the University of Utah named Polly Weissner published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that examined something researchers had largely overlooked. She had spent 40 years studying the Juhoansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, and she had kept detailed notes on 174 of their conversations across multiple camps. What she discovered was that the way people talked changed completely depending on whether the sun was up or down. During the day, conversation was practical and often tense. People discussed food, complained about someone who was not pulling their weight, argued about how meat from a hunt was divided. About a third of daytime talk involved criticism and grievances. Who ate too much? Who did not help carry the firewood? Who was being unfair? It was functional, necessary, even. It kept the group operating and held people accountable. But when the sun went down and people gathered around a single fire, sometimes as many as 15 people converging at one hearth, everything shifted. The tone changed almost immediately. The complaints dropped away. People relaxed. They told stories. They recounted hunts that had gone wrong in funny or terrifying ways. They shared news about relatives in other camps. They talked about marriages and births and long-running feuds. They told traditional myths about animals that talked and spirits that wandered the bush at night. Weissner described the firelight as something that bonds, mellows, and excites people at the same time. She said there is something about fire in the middle of the darkness that is intimate in a way nothing else is. Nighttime around a fire, she wrote, is universally time for bonding, for telling social information, for entertaining, for a lot of shared emotions. And she made a point of noting that the Bushmen still live from hunting and gathering. For 99% of our evolution, she said. This is how our ancestors lived. Whatever happens around those campfires gives us a window into what early humans were doing with their evenings for hundreds of thousands of years. This connects to a theory that goes even further back. In 1996, the evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar published a book called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language. His argument was provocative. He said that human language did not evolve for coordinating hunts or giving directions. It evolved for gossip. Here's his reasoning. Primates maintain their social bonds through physical grooming, picking insects out of each other's fur, sitting close and touching. The hygiene part is almost a side effect. The real function is connection, a way of saying, "You matter to me," without words. But grooming is slow. You can only groom one individual at a time. And as early human groups grew larger, eventually reaching around 150 people, which is now known as Dunbar's number, the time required to groom everyone enough to keep the social network intact would have consumed nearly half of every day. Language solved that bottleneck. It was a social technology, and it worked brilliantly. With speech, you can communicate with several people simultaneously. You can sit in a circle and share information about who helped out last week, and who took more than their share, and who seems like a reliable partner for a long hunt, and who has been sneaking off to meet someone from the neighboring band, all while your hands are busy doing something else entirely. Dunbar argued that this social chat, what we casually call gossip, was the original and primary purpose of human language. Not poetry, not philosophy, not commands, just people talking about other people. And that sounds trivial until you realize what it actually accomplishes. Gossip builds reputations. It enforces group norms. It creates shared understanding about who can be trusted and who cannot. It turns a collection of 150 individuals into a functioning community. So, when ancient humans sat around the fire trading stories about the cousin who married into a distant band, or the hunter who froze up when the lion charged, they were not killing time. They were building the social architecture that made cooperation possible. The shared knowledge, the collective trust, the agreed-upon rules about fairness and loyalty. All of it was assembled and maintained through talk, through story, through what we would dismiss today as just chatting. But ancient leisure was not all stories and songs. Some of it was competitive. Humans have been playing structured games for at least 5,000 years, and probably much longer. The oldest complete board game ever discovered was pulled from the Royal Cemetery at Ur in modern-day Iraq during excavations led by the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley in the 1920s. The game, which nobody knows the original name of, is now called the Royal Game of Ur. The board that Woolley found dates to around 2600 BC. It is inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, red limestone, and shell in intricate geometric patterns. It sits today in the British Museum, and it is genuinely beautiful, not just as an artifact, but as a piece of design. And remarkably, we know how to play it. A cuneiform tablet written by a Babylonian astronomer in 177 BC lays out the rules. 2 players race their pieces along a track of 20 squares, using pyramid-shaped dice to determine how far they move. Squares, decorated with rosettes, give you an extra turn or protect your piece from capture. The game spread across the entire ancient world. Boards have turned up in excavations from Crete to Sri Lanka, scratched into stone floors, carved into wooden tables, played by everyone from kings to dock workers. The game was popular for over 2,000 years. Some researchers believe a version survived into the 20th century among the Jewish community of Kochi, India. The game wasn't a novelty item. People played it the way we play chess or backgammon, as a serious pastime with strategy and stakes. At the height of its popularity, the game even acquired spiritual significance. Players believed that events in the game reflected messages from the gods, that the dice were not random but carried divine intention. A simple board game had become a way of talking to the supernatural. But even Ur was not the oldest. In pre-dynastic Egyptian tombs dating back roughly 5,000 years, archaeologists have found boards for a game called Senet. That makes Senet the oldest known board game on Earth. It was played on a grid of 30 squares, and the Egyptians took it seriously. They believed successful players were favored by the gods. Senate boards were placed inside burial chambers alongside food and weapons and jewelry, all the things the dead were expected to need in the afterlife. A painting inside the tomb of Queen Nefertari, one of the most famous pieces of Egyptian funerary art ever created, shows the queen sitting cross-legged and playing Senet. She is focused, she is engaged. She is doing exactly what billions of people have done since. She is playing a game because she has the time, and it is fun. And then there are the physical competitions. Cave paintings in the Lascaux system, roughly 15,000 years old, appear to show figures sprinting and wrestling. In the Bayangkongor province of Mongolia, cave paintings dating to around 7000 BC depict a wrestling match surrounded by a crowd of spectators. Not two people fighting over food, a crowd watching two people compete for sport. In Egypt, the Cave of Swimmers in the Gilf Kebir Plateau contains rock art from roughly 8000 BC, showing human figures in swimming poses, evidence of recreational swimming in a region that, during the Neolithic period, wasn't desert at all but a green, lake-dotted landscape. And in Japan, prehistoric cave paintings depict what appears to be an early form of sumo wrestling. The evidence goes further still. Mancala, one of the oldest continuously played games in the world, likely dates back over 4,000 years. Some of the earliest Mancala boards were not boards at all. They were rows of pits carved directly into stone slabs, temple steps, and bare rock, played using seeds or pebbles or shells. You can still find ancient Mancala boards cut into stone surfaces across Africa and the Middle East. People literally carved their entertainment into the ground beneath their feet. These are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern. Wherever ancient humans had enough security and enough free time, the same things showed up. Physical competition, structured games with rules and pieces, performances, both musical and visual, stories told and retold around fires until they became myths. All of it arising from the same basic condition: time with nothing urgent to fill it. And that's really what this comes down to. Every invention on this list, the flute, the cave painting, the campfire story, the board game, the wrestling match watched by a cheering crowd, none of them are survival behaviors. None of them kept anyone fed or sheltered or safe from predators. They exist because the human brain does not handle emptiness well. When there is no immediate problem to solve, no threat to respond to, no task demanding attention, the brain starts doing something else. It starts creating. It reaches for whatever material is nearby, a bone, a piece of charcoal, a handful of stones, and turns it into something that did not exist before. A melody, a painting, a game, a story. We live in the first era in human history where boredom has been nearly eliminated. Your phone is always in reach. There is always another video to watch, another feed to scroll, another notification pulling at your attention. The average person checks their phone somewhere around 90 times a day. The empty hours that produced 42,000 years of culture have been filled in by algorithms specifically designed to keep your attention occupied every waking second. Ancient humans could sit for an hour with nothing happening and eventually pick up a bone and start carving. We can't sit for 30 seconds in a waiting room without reaching for a screen. And the uncomfortable question that sits underneath all of this evidence is whether we traded something important when we made that deal. Ancient humans had nothing but time and their own minds, and they built art that people still travel across the world to see, music that scientists are still trying to reconstruct, and games that are still being played thousands of years later. We have infinite entertainment at our fingertips and spend most of it consuming what other people made. Maybe boredom was never the enemy. Maybe it was the raw material. The thing the brain does when there is no input, no stimulation, no prefabricated content being fed into it, is it starts building. It asks questions. It wonders what would happen if. That process created everything covered in this video, from the first note played on a vulture bone flute in a German cave to the first story painted on a limestone wall in Indonesia. That creative restlessness is the whole engine, and every piece of evidence suggests it runs best when you give it room. The Kalahari Bushmen still gather around the fire most nights. They have been doing this, or something very close to it, for a very long time. The stories they tell are about hunts and marriages and arguments and myths. They talk until the embers burn low. And when you look at everything that those long, quiet, unscheduled hours produced across thousands of generations, it starts to seem less like wasted time and more like the most productive thing our species has ever done. If this one got you thinking, hit subscribe and leave a like. And tell us in the comments, what is the first thing you would have invented if you were stuck in a cave with nothing but time on your hands?